But we just want to get a little bit of background on you and who you are. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up and your family, and some of those things that some of us probably don't know about you.
Yeah, well, I thought I've been in the witness protection program for a while, so I guess I'm going to have to talk about my background. A very non-traditional Silicon Valley, both background and history in the Valley. And maybe not for some of you, but my parents were immigrants to the United States. Came over in steerage, and people came over in ships, went through Ellis Island in New York, and then in the early part of the 20th century worked in sweatshops in New York City as teenagers. And then my parents met. Their dream was to open up a grocery store on the Lower East Side of New York. And not quite ever understanding this to maybe 50 years later, I realized my parents were entrepreneurs, and they did do a startup. And a startup is being defined as not working for anybody else other than yourself and being responsible for your own career. And they struggled as first-generation Americans did, and they had this dream for what their kid would do, and I did exactly the opposite.
And what did you work in the store? Did you? What was your role?
As a little kid, me and my sister had a sister who was about 12 years older. Your role is when you were tall enough not to fall into the pickle barrel.
Sure.
You shelved stuff and you helped around, and you tried not to eat all the candy. As you can tell, I failed.
Do you feel like, in terms of your work ethic? I mean, I was looking at your, some of your background and the things you've done, and it was like page after page after page. I mean, you seem to have a work ethic that is quite unique. Do you feel like that came from watching your parents kind of struggle through this experience in the store? Do you feel like it was innate in you? Where did that come from?
No, I at least wouldn't say consciously, maybe unconsciously, but I was a real screw up in school. By the time I was 6, my father left home. My mother raised me as a single, semi-divorced parent in the 1960s. I don't think I did a day of homework because my mother was, let's just say, I lived in an outpatient clinic, and that was my apartment. And so day to day, I never quite knew what was going on. So leaving home was probably the sanest thing that happened to me for the first 17 years of my life.
And talk about what, as you went to school, where did you go to school? What did you plan to study?
I went to school in New York City, and standard New York City public junior high and high school education. Like all kids of my generation, first generation American Jewish immigrants, your son is going to be an accountant, a doctor, or a lawyer, depending on their, the tests. And of course, that was, what they packed me off and sent me to college to go do. Of course, that wasn't my plan.
How'd that work out?
I dropped out after my first semester. But I managed to try every possible interesting substance in school in the 70s and packed in a lot of activities. And another long story, but it was the middle of the Vietnam War, and through a couple of interesting trips, the first thing was I decided I hated college, and I couldn't focus on anything, and had no idea why I was there. And I had a girlfriend at the time who was actually working really hard to stay in school, and she said, and I happened to get a scholarship by accident, though after a while I realized not all of these are accidents. Who said, "Why are you here? Some of us actually care to be in school. Why don't you leave and go figure out, what you want to go do?" And I guess she didn't think I'd take her up on it, and I stuck out my thumb, and I hitchhiked from Michigan, where I went to school, to Florida, and I ended up accidentally working at the Miami International Airport, loading racehorses onto cargo planes. And
Specialized? You were that vertical?
Yeah, that was try to find that ad in a newspaper. And knew nothing about airplanes, but became fascinated with, here I am in an airport, and I wasn't with the pilots. I didn't want to fly, but it was with all the electronics in the plane. I started taking home all the manuals and said, boy, I'd like to learn how to do this stuff. But somebody said, gee, without any training, there's no way you're going to go ever do this. And fortunately or unfortunately, the government had a war going on and was looking for young and kind of semi-stupid teenagers, and I volunteered for the Air Force. And ended up volunteering to go to Southeast Asia. And I spent 2 years during the Vietnam War learning how to repair electronics and got into a field called electronic warfare, which also happened to be an interesting accident